Chicago, 1893. Thousands have lined up to ride a steel wheel 80 meters high, the first of its kind. But this wheel was 51 days late. Construction was rushed, safety checks incomplete, and today it's about to carry over 2,000 people at once. Something even the largest Ferris wheel today cannot do. Will the structure hold? Will the engine cope with the weight? Or will it collapse in front of the entire world? These are questions its designer George Ferris was asking himself the night before, because to build this wheel, he bet everything. His money, his name, his future. If it fails today, so will he. This is the untold story of the world's first Ferris wheel. To understand how this wheel came to exist, we need to go back to where it almost didn't. 1891, 18 months before opening day, Daniel Burnham, a 44-year-old chief of construction for the World's Columbian Exposition, is reviewing the fair progress report. On paper, everything looks fine. The World's Fair wasn't just an exposition, it was a statement of national power, the closest thing the era had to the internet, compressing the entire world into one place. Whoever hosted it owned the moment, and America had fought hard for this moment. 200 gleaming white buildings, pioneering electrical displays, architecture unlike anything America had ever built. They even had a name for it, the White City. And Chicago had beaten New York for the right to host. And the New York architects never forgot it. They were watching, waiting for Burnham to fail. The pressure wasn't just professional, it was personal. And Burnham knew what the report wasn't saying. 2 years earlier, Paris had unveiled the Eiffel Tower, the tallest structure ever built. Not just engineering, a declaration that this is what France is capable of. Chicago needed its own answer, not something that matched it, something that buried it. Burnham's philosophy had always been simple. If the vision is grand enough, the world will organize itself around it. But for the first time, the vision wasn't coming. Proposals flooded in from architects across the country. Taller towers, slight variations, poor imitations, and every single one disappointed him. Nobody was thinking. They were copying. Then came the moment that pushed him to his edge. Gustav Eiffel himself offered to build a taller version of his own tower for Chicago. To Burnham, this wasn't a generous offer. It was an insult. France was offering to save America from its own imagination. But in that humiliation, something clicked. He'd been thinking about the problem the wrong way. The Eiffel Tower wasn't designed by an architect, it was designed by an engineer. So he gathered the best engineers in the country and gave them a single challenge. Come up with something that will out-Eiffel Eiffel. And among those who answered was a 33-year-old bridge engineer. His name was George Washington Gale Ferris Jr. George Ferris wasn't a visionary the way Burnham was. He was a civil engineer. Railroads, bridges, steel. Practical work. He'd built his career the same way he'd built everything else, by hard work. When news of the fair reached him, he came to Chicago in search of opportunity. His company secured a contract to inspect steel for the fair's buildings, exactly his kind of job. He'd always felt the fair was missing something, but he never fully gave it a thought until now. Then it came to him. A memory from childhood, a water wheel spinning slowly by his home in Nevada. The idea of a vertical wheel carrying passengers had existed for centuries, but Ferris was the first to propose building one from steel, on a monumental scale. A rotating steel wheel, 80 meters in diameter, nearly as tall as the Statue of Liberty, which was only 6 years old at the time, high enough to carry passengers to see the entire exposition below. Modeled after a bicycle wheel, lightweight, web-like, but structurally robust. Ferris was certain. He'd done the thinking. Now, he just needed someone to say yes. He presented the design to Burnham. Burnham wasn't sure. He brought it to the committee. The reaction was immediate and brutal. It will collapse under its own weight. A wheel carrying over 2,000 people. This is madness. The proposal was rejected. For Ferris, this didn't compute. To him, if the committee said no, it meant he hadn't worked hard enough yet. He went back. After 3 weeks of calculating every force, every load, every stress point, documented in exhaustive detail. Burnham and the committee were silenced by the precision of it. This time, they gave him tentative approval. However, the next day, they took it back. Fear of collapsing steel and screaming passengers has returned. One committee member even called it a monstrosity. Ferris had answered every objection with data, every doubt with precision, and it still wasn't enough. For the first time in his life, his formula had failed him. Hard work had not moved the door, so the question became, what would? But the committee hadn't rejected his engineering, they rejected his risk. The fair was already running behind schedule and over budget. Agreeing to build Ferris's wheel meant taking on another problem that could spiral. Every time they looked at the wheel, all they saw was what could go wrong and who would be blamed. It became evident to Ferris that the question wasn't, how do I convince them? It was, how do I take the risk away from them? That meant one thing, he had to fund it himself. This wasn't how Ferris operated, but the wheel had changed something in him. He believed in it, more than he feared losing everything. So he made the leap. He spent $25,000 of his own money on detailed designs and blueprints, and began pitching investors. By late November 1892, he presented his design to Burnham again. But this time, he didn't come with conviction alone. He came with $400,000 in secured financing, nearly $14 million today, full construction blueprints, and a company formed specifically to build it, the Ferris Wheel Company. The committee had nothing left to fear. The risk was entirely his. So on December 16, 1892, they approved it. But Ferris had just inherited a new problem. With only a few months left until the fair's opening, Ferris found himself racing against time. The moment construction began, Ferris discovered that building the wheel and funding the wheel were two entirely different battles. Jackson Park, the site for the fair, sat on nearly 6 meters of clay and sand, soft and unreliable ground, and Ferris needed to build two 43-meter steel towers on it, towers that would carry the entire weight of the wheel, the cars and everyone inside them. Workers drove timber piles almost 10 meters deep, just to reach solid ground, to form the base. Every problem that emerged, it cost him time he could feel disappearing. For the wheel to spin, a single axle had to carry everything, and the engineering demanded it be forged as one continuous piece of steel. What Ferris needed had never been made before. The axle that came out of the forge weighed 64 tons, the largest single piece of forged steel ever produced at the time. The wheel itself wasn't a single structure, it was two giant wheels spaced 9 meters apart, every rim connected to the axle hub by iron tension rods, the same principle that keeps a bicycle wheel strong and lightweight. Between the two wheels run struts and diagonal rods, giving it the rigidity of a railway bridge. But even with everything in place, one question remained that nobody had ever had to answer before. How do you even move a structure this size? His solution was two steam engines, 1,000 horsepower each, one as the main driver, the other as a backup, or both running together when the wheel is at maximum capacity. To ensure reliable operation even during Chicago's harsh freezing winters, the boilers were housed in a brick building about 60 meters away, keeping smoke and heat from the crowds. Steam traveled underground through insulated pipes directly to the engines. When the steam entered the engine cylinders, it pushed the pistons back and forth. The piston rods turned a crankshaft, which spun a massive flywheel to smooth out power delivery. The crankshaft also operates a slide valve, which alternately directs high-pressure steam into each side of the cylinder, pushing the piston back and forth and driving the engine's motion. The crankshaft then drives a large gear that engages with even bigger gears that power the massive first Ferris wheel. Each of the 36 passenger cars weighed 13 tons, each holding 60 people. That meant the Ferris wheel could lift 2,160 passengers at once. Cars and passengers combined added more than 500 tons of live load, all of it turning on one axle. But time had run out before all the safety checks could be completed. The fair had been open since May 1st. Burnham's White City was drawing crowds, and Ferris had nothing to show. Every day the wheel sat idle, his investors noticed. The pressure to open became impossible to resist. So on June 21st, 1893, 51 days behind schedule, the wheel finally opened to the public. Which leads us back to this moment. Even after everything, Ferris still had no way of knowing with absolute certainty whether the wheel would hold when it's at capacity. But the wheel was an instant success. Within days, it became the sensation of the fair. Thousands lined up every morning. In the first week alone, over 61,000 tickets were sold. The price for the ride was 50 cents, a small fortune then, about $17 today. The ride took 20 minutes to complete 2 full revolutions. One slow rotation for boarding, and one continuous rotation that would give passengers a full view of the fair. The fair's biggest day came on October 9th, Chicago Day. Over 713,000 people passed through the gates, shattering Paris's record of 397,000. Burnham had his moment. America had defeated Paris. By the time the fair closed, 27 million people had attended. Nearly 1.5 million had ridden Ferris's wheel. The risk had paid off. The world loved it. But Ferris had been so consumed with building the wheel, so focused on making it work, that he hadn't looked closely enough at the contract governing what came after. The revenue sharing terms heavily favored the fair's organizers. Of the nearly $750,000 the wheel generated, Ferris and his investors only received $395,000, far less than they anticipated. The man who had bet everything to own his creation discovered that ownership on paper meant something very different to the people who had written the agreement. He fought back. 2 years of litigation, fending off patent disputes, battling the exposition's management of what he believed had been taken from him. But lawsuits cost money, and Ferris was already stretched thin. After the fair closed, Ferris dismantled the wheel and reassembled it on Chicago's north side, convinced the sensation could survive beyond the exposition. It couldn't. The context that had made it miraculous, the White City, the crowds, the electricity, was gone. Without it, the wheel was just a machine, and machines without magic lose money. The losses mounted. The financial depression hit his steel inspection company. Legal fees drained what little remained. One by one, Ferris sold off his ownership in the wheel, the thing he had bled to own, just to keep himself solvent. It wasn't enough. By 1896, he had lost his companies, his ownership, and his savings. The man who had built the world's most audacious structure died of typhoid fever. He was only 37 years old. In 1903, the wheel was sold at auction for $8,150, a fraction of what it cost to build. Reassembled one last time on the Louisiana Purchase Exposition of 1904, it earned its new owners $215,000. Then on May 11, 1906, it was dynamited for scrap. The first Ferris wheel ended not with a ceremony, but with an explosion and silence. Ferris had been called a lunatic, the man with wheels in his head. His passion was a flaw that consumed him, but he invented something extraordinary. Against doubt and impossible odds, he turned skeptics into believers. Every carnival since 1893 had had a Ferris wheel, a tribute to the man who refused to play it safe. He never published his designs, and over time, those details were lost with him. The man who defeated the Eiffel Tower left almost no record of how he did it.